Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with News and Views from the Nefarium on Thursday, December 15th, 2022. Folks, this is our last our last News and Views of 2022. Daniel and I want to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. There will be no more News and Views until 2023 after January 10th. That's when I plan to resume the blogs and the News and Views. Unless, of course, some big news story breaks and I just can't resist commenting about it. I'm going to be taking some time off from the website and everything during the holidays. And also remember, there are no more vid chats in 2023. The schedule for vid chats up through April of 2023 is already posted on the website, so please make sure you look at that and jot down the schedule on your date book or whatever. Now, I want to talk today about this recent announcement of Florida Governor Ron De Santis in the United States, where he announced that he wants to hold a Florida grand jury into the vaccine manufacturers. I think there's a lot more going on with this story behind the scenes than meets the eye. This appeared in the Florida Standard. It's dateline December 13th, just a couple days ago, by Josh Miller. I want to read several paragraphs from this article. In fact, all but the last three paragraphs of this article. So here we go. Quote, "Today, Governor Ron De Santis announced that the state of Florida is impaneling a grand jury to review evidence to hold COVID-19 vaccine manufacturers accountable under Florida law." Now, folks, you don't impanel grand juries unless you're intending some sort of criminal or civil action. I would suspect, my first suspicion is that both are going to come out of this grand jury. But we're just beginning to scratch the surface of what I think the agenda might be here. So continuing, quote, and I'm quoting Governor DeSantis here, quote, "Today I'm announcing a petition with the Supreme Court of Florida to impanel a statewide grand jury to investigate any and all wrongdoing in Florida with respect to the COVID-19 vaccines. We anticipate that we will get approval for that," unquote, Governor DeSantis stated at a roundtable conference with medical professionals and vaccine-injured citizens. That's quite important here, folks. Speaking alongside Florida's Surgeon General, Dr. Joseph Ladapo, the governor said the grand jury will investigate the potentially dangerous and deadly side effects of the mRNA injections to hold the manufacturers accountable. And I'm glad that the newspaper article writer called them injections rather than vaccines. Anyway, continuing. Following the announcement, the governor and Surgeon General held a special live roundtable event with leading healthcare practitioners and scientists. The roundtable also included very emotional testimony from vaccine-injured men and women. DeSantis and Ladapo were joined by a panel of experts, including Jay Bhattacharya, professor of medicine at Stanford University, Tracy Hugg, an epidemiologist and clinical researcher, Joseph Freeman, emergency medicine physician in New Orleans, Steve Templeton, associate professor of microbiology and immunology at Indiana University, Brett Weinstein, a public intellectual and former professor of evolutionary biology, Christine Stable Ben, professor in global health at the University of Southern Denmark, and Martin Kulldorff, a biostatistician, epidemiologist, and former professor of medicine at Harvard Law School. So in other words, it looks to me, folks, and again, this I think is very significant, DeSantis is positioning Florida to be the basically the cover for the opposition to the COVID injection narrative, okay? Now, this is hugely important, and we'll get back to why in a minute. At the roundtable, Florida Surgeon General Dr. Joseph Ladapo announced that the state of Florida will launch a surveillance investigation to uncover details related to sudden deaths associated with the COVID-19 mRNA vaccines. Quote, and this is Dr. Ladapo, the Surgeon General of Florida, and this is what I really want you to listen hard and pay attention to. Quote, we will answer this question. It is a question that I'm sure keeps the CEOs of Pfizer and Moderna up late at night, hoping no one ever looks, unquote, said Ladapo. Quote, we're going to look here in Florida, unquote. Now, folks, that to me, I think, is revealing the agenda because, as you know, the vaccine industry received back in the 80s during the Reagan administration certain exemptions in order to be able to bring their products to market. And those exemptions basically were exemptions from lawsuits against them if there were adverse reactions and so on. However, the exemptions do not extend to the case if the vaccine companies have committed fraud. That is to say, if you make false claims or cover up evidence or misrepresent evidence or so on and so forth, those exemptions are lost. That's step number one. So in other words, by impaneling a grand jury, what I suspect Governor DeSantis is doing is he is using the federalist system in this country against the National Institute of Health, the CDC, Dr. Fauci, and so on, and the overreach that occurred. There will be ripple effects from this grand jury that will go on, I'm quite certain, for any number of years, if not decades. Because what he's doing now is he's going after the bureaucratic overreach and the practice of policy, let's put it that way, rather than the practice of medicine, which unfortunately, you know, my experience with having had the heart attack during all of this was that most, not all, of the medical profession was much more interested in getting me jabbed than it was in addressing the heart issue. Fortunately, I refused all of that. Now, what does this mean? Ultimately, I think the agenda here is to overthrow any regulatory policy giving these types of corporate exemptions as being unconstitutional. In other words, the exemptions are against the constitutional amendments against patents of nobility, against, in other words, special privilege granted by executive power. And folks, that's huge, because if my guess is correct, this means that Governor DeSantis just took direct aim at Donald Trump. Because you'll recall that it was Mr. Trump, not Mr. Biden. Let's remember this. It was Mr. Trump that was on television every day touting Operation Warp Speed. It was Mr. Trump that took those donations from Pfizer during the 2016 campaign. And it was Mr. Trump that negotiated those deals with the pharma companies for lower pharmaceutical medicine costs. And my suspicion in that bargain, in that deal, has always been that the quid pro quo was Operation Warp Speed. They could bring these experimental drugs to market and foist them on people and make money, and do so under the guise that these injections are vaccines and using that exemption from liability. So in other words, I think this Florida grand jury is in a very, very subtle way, if you're willing to read between the lines of what's being said here, it's a very, very subtle but very obvious, if you stop and think about it, shot across the bow of Mr. Trump, who has to this day not come clean and gotten out in front of the vaccine issue. A lot of his support dried up, and a lot of his support, so-called support, is very soft because of his stance on the quacksine issue. So I think that he's facing from Governor DeSantis, a very, very serious problem here that he's going to have to get out in front of, like it or not, because the Florida grand jury, as far as I can tell, I think is meaning business, and they're going to start calling people to Florida to answer questions in front of that grand jury. And if you don't go, if you get called and you don't go, that's under the law. That's a pretty serious admission, a pretty serious problem should the grand jury lead to any civil or criminal trial process. So huge story here. I want everybody to kind of watch this one because it could be the beginning of the unraveling of the whole COVID narrative. Now, I want to wish everybody once again a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from Daniel and I and everybody at the website. Really, this is kind of a community guided website, so Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all of you and yours. Please be safe during the holidays if you're traveling, and we'll see you again in 2023 with the news and views resuming after January 10th, unless, of course, there's a big story that I just itch to talk about that occurs before then, which has happened before when I take these holiday breaks. Anyway, that'll do it for today's news and views, everybody. Bye-bye. Godspeed, God bless, Merry Christmas, and we'll see you on the flip side.